Hello, and welcome. I'm so glad you're here today. If you remember when milk was delivered to your doorstep in glass bottles, when every man wore a hat, when you could buy a candy bar for a nickel, then this video is for you. Today, we're taking a journey back to the 1950s, a decade that many of you lived through, and perhaps remember as some of the best years of your life. Whether you were a child playing in the neighborhood until dark, a teenager discovering rock and roll, or a young adult starting a family, the 1950s shaped who we became. We're going to explore what daily life was really like back then. Not the history book version, but the real, lived experience. The sounds, the smells, the routines, the little details that made life in the 1950s so distinct and memorable. We'll visit the American home and remember those modern conveniences that seemed like miracles. We'll return to childhood, to simpler times of playing outside and Saturday morning cartoons. We'll revisit the entertainment that brought us together, the technology that was changing our lives, and the social fabric of a nation finding its way in the post-war world. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's travel back together. And please, as we go through this journey, I'd love for you to share your own memories in the comments below. Your stories matter, and I know many viewers would love to hear them. Let's begin our journey back to the 1950s. After the hardships of the Depression and World War II, the 1950s represented a fresh start for millions of American families. The suburbs were booming, and the American dream had a very specific look: a single-family home with a yard, a car in the driveway, and a television antenna on the roof. Do you remember those neat rows of ranch-style homes? Places like Levittown made home ownership possible for families who never thought they could afford it. For around $8,000 or $9,000, you could buy a brand new home, something that seems impossible to imagine today. These weren't grand houses, but they were modern. They had central heating, indoor plumbing, and enough space for a growing family. The kitchen was the heart of the home, and oh, how kitchens were changing. If you were lucky enough to have a modern kitchen in the 1950s, you probably had Formica countertops, those smooth, colorful surfaces that were so easy to clean. Colors were bright and cheerful: pink, turquoise, yellow, mint green. Everything was designed to make housework easier and more pleasant. Electric appliances were transforming daily life. The electric mixer meant you didn't have to beat cake batter by hand for 20 minutes. The automatic toaster popped up your bread at just the right moment. And the refrigerator with its freezer compartment meant you could keep ice cream right at home and didn't have to visit the iceman anymore. The electric can opener, the percolator coffee pot, the automatic washing machine, these weren't luxuries. They were becoming standard equipment. Companies like General Electric, Westinghouse, and Frigidaire were promising to make life easier, and for many families, they delivered. And then there was the television. By the mid-1950s, more than half of American homes had a television set. It became the centerpiece of the living room. Families arranged their furniture around it. It's where you gathered after dinner, where you watched the news, where America came together every Sunday night to see what Ed Sullivan had in store. The furniture of the era had its own distinctive style, didn't it? Chrome-legged dinette sets in the kitchen. Plastic seat covers on the couch to keep it nice, of course. Danish modern coffee tables. Maybe a comfortable recliner for Dad. And those colors, soft pastels mixed with bold patterns. Life in the 1950s had a rhythm to it, a predictability that many people found comforting. In most families, Dad went off to work in the morning, briefcase in hand, hat on his head. Mom stayed home to manage the household, take care of the children, and have dinner ready when everyone returned. Now, we understand today that this wasn't everyone's experience, and these rigid roles had their limitations. But for many families, this was simply the way life was structured. Children had their responsibilities too. You might have had to take out the trash, set the table, or help with the dishes. Boys might mow the lawn or help Dad with repairs. Girls might help Mom with cooking or ironing. These chores weren't optional, they were your contribution to the family. Dinner time was sacred. The whole family sat down together, no eating in front of the TV, no grabbing food and running off to your room. Dad sat at the head of the table, Mom brought out the meal she'd spent the afternoon preparing, and everyone talked about their day. The meals themselves, well, we remember them fondly, don't we? Pot roast, meatloaf, fried chicken casseroles, green bean casserole topped with those French fried onions, Jell-O molds with fruit suspended inside, the fancier, the better. TV dinners, when they came along, seemed almost space age. Sunday had its own special rhythm. Many families started with church in the morning. You put on your Sunday best, and that meant your nicest clothes, your shiniest shoes. After church, maybe you'd have a big family dinner with roast beef or ham. In the afternoon, families might take a Sunday drive, just cruising around, looking at the countryside or visiting relatives. You might stop at a roadside attraction or get ice cream cones. Sundays were also for visiting. Grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins' family gatherings were regular occurrences. The adults would sit and talk while the children played in the yard. And the neighborhoods themselves, they were communities in a way that's hard to describe to younger generations. You knew your neighbors. You really knew them. Their children played with your children. You borrowed sugar or eggs when you ran short. You looked out for each other. People sat on their front porches in the evening. They chatted over the fence. Children ran freely from yard to yard, and every adult on the block had permission to correct any child who was misbehaving. It was a different kind of connection, wasn't it? If you were a child in the 1950s, you had a freedom that children today can barely imagine. Your mother sent you outside after breakfast, and you weren't expected home until lunch. Then out you went again until dinner. And on summer evenings, you stayed out until the street lights came on. That was the signal that it was time to head home. What did you do with all that time? You played. You used your imagination. You didn't have video games or tablets. You had the whole neighborhood as your playground. You might play hide and seek, kick the can, or Red Rover. You'd ride your bicycle without a helmet, of course, all over the neighborhood. You'd build forts in the woods, catch fireflies in jars, or play with your friends until you were called in for supper. The toys of the era seem simple now, but they captivated us for hours. Do you remember getting a hula hoop? In 1958, everyone had to have one. You'd stand in the backyard, swiveling your hips, trying to keep that plastic ring spinning around your waist. Mr. Potato Head, and back then, you used a real potato. The slinky walking down the stairs. Color forms sticking to the refrigerator. Erector sets for building. Cap guns that made that satisfying crack and smelled like sulfur. Baby dolls that could drink water and wet their diapers. Matchbox cars that you'd race across the floor. And marbles. Remember trading marbles? Cat's eyes, Clearys, Steelies. Every child had a marble collection. If you had a penny or a nickel, you could walk to the corner store and buy candy. The penny candy counter was a wonder. Mary Jane's, Tootsie Rolls, waxed lips, candy cigarettes, bazooka gum with the little comic inside. The store owner knew you by name and would help you decide how to spend your precious pennies. Saturday morning was special. Why? Oh, you'd wake up early, pour yourself a bowl of cereal, maybe Sugar Smacks or Frosted Flakes, and plant yourself in front of the TV for cartoons. Mighty Mouse, Woody Woodpecker, Looney Tunes. The Howdy Doody Show with Buffalo Bob. The Mickey Mouse Club, and you knew every Mouseketeer's name, didn't you? Of course, childhood in the 1950s also meant growing up during the Cold War. At school, you practiced duck and cover drills. The teacher would say, "Drop!" and you'd get under your desk and cover your head. You saw the films Bert the Turtle telling you to duck and cover. Some families built fallout shelters in their backyards. You saw the public service announcements. It was a strange mixture, the innocence of childhood combined with this underlying anxiety about nuclear war. But children are resilient. You did the drills and then went out to play. School in the 1950s was formal, structured, and strict. You dressed properly, boys in slacks and button-up shirts, girls in dresses or skirts. Jeans were for playing outside, not for school. The teacher was an authority figure, and you respected that authority. You stood when an adult entered the room. You said, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir." If you misbehaved, there were consequences. Maybe you had to stay after school, write sentences on the blackboard, or receive a paddling from the principal. And when you got home and your parents found out you'd been in trouble? Well, you were in trouble again. You practiced penmanship, remember those sheets with the dotted lines? You learned cursive writing, and your teacher expected it to be neat and legible. You wrote with a pencil, and if you were in the upper grades, maybe you earned the privilege of using a pen. The lunchroom, do you remember? The smell of the cafeteria. The lunch ladies in their hairnets serving up hot meals. Sloppy joes, fish sticks, mystery meat. And the milk, it came in those little glass bottles. You could get white or chocolate, and there was always someone who wanted to trade. Some children brought their lunch from home in a metal lunchbox, Roy Rogers, Hopalong Cassidy, or whatever TV show was popular. Inside, a thermos of milk or juice, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, maybe a piece of fruit and some cookies. Recess was freedom. The playground had real metal slides that got hot in the sun and fast when you went down. Swings with thick chains. Seesaws. Monkey bars. Merry-go-rounds that you could spin fast enough to make yourself dizzy. The boys might play baseball or marbles. The girls might play jacks or jump rope, remember the chants? Cinderella, dressed in yellow, went upstairs to kiss a fella. Everyone knew the words. And then there was report card day. You brought home that folded piece of paper, and your parents reviewed every grade, every comment from the teacher. Good grades were expected, and poor grades meant serious discussions about applying yourself and doing better. Education was valued, and it was seen as the pathway to a good life, a good job, a secure future. The 1950s was when television truly became part of American life. It changed everything: how we spent our evenings, what we talked about at work, how we understood the world. Monday nights meant I Love Lucy. Lucy Ricardo's schemes, her friendship with Ethel, Ricky's exasperation. 44 million people watched every week. When Lucy gave birth on the show in 1953, more people watched that than President Eisenhower's inauguration. Do you remember sitting down to watch? The whole family gathered in the living room. Dad in his chair, Mom on the couch, children on the floor. It was thrilling. If you were a parent, it was shocking. Elvis Presley burst into American consciousness in 1956. That hip movement, that sneer, that voice. When he appeared on Ed Sullivan, they famously showed him only from the waist up. Your parents might have thought Elvis was dangerous, but you thought he was dreaming. Hound dog, don't be cruel, love me tender. You knew every word. Elvis Presley burst into American consciousness in 1956. That hip movement, that sneer, that voice. When he appeared on Ed Sullivan, they famously showed him only from the waist up. Your parents might have thought Elvis was dangerous, but you thought he was dreaming. Hound dog, don't be cruel, love me tender. You knew every word. The sock hop at school, do you remember? You'd take off your shoes and dance in your socks so you wouldn't scuff the gymnasium floor. The girls in their full skirts and bobby socks, the boys with their hair slicked back. The music played on a record player, and you danced to the hits of the day. The hand jive, the stroll, early versions of rock and roll dancing. The chaperones watching carefully to make sure you didn't dance too close. After school, teenagers gathered at the local diner or soda shop. The jukebox in the corner, glowing with colored lights. You'd drop in a nickel or a dime, punch in your selection B7, C3, and your song would play. You'd share a milkshake with 2 straws, eat French fries with your friends, and talk for hours. The jukebox was the soundtrack to teenage life. Friday and Saturday nights might mean the drive-in movie theater. You'd pull up in your car, hook the speaker onto your window, and watch the movie under the stars. The drive-in was as much about being with your friends or your date as it was about the movie itself. And radio was still huge. American Bandstand wasn't on TV yet, it was still on radio. You'd listen to your favorite DJ, hear the top 40 countdown, and discover new music. Your transistor radio meant you could take music with you, even if it was just one tiny speaker. Going to the movies was an event. The theater itself was special, ornate architecture, red velvet curtains, ushers with flashlights showing you to your seat. You'd watch coming attractions, maybe a newsreel about current events, a cartoon, and then the feature film. The stars of the 1950s were glamorous, larger than life. Marilyn Monroe in The 7-Year Itch, that white dress billowing over the subway grate. That image defined an era. James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. He was only in 3 major films before his death in 1955, but he became the symbol of teenage angst and rebellion. Grace Kelly, so elegant and beautiful, who left Hollywood to become a Rio princess. Cary Grant, the epitome of sophistication. Elizabeth Taylor, Audrey Hepburn, John Wayne, Humphrey Bogart. Often the movie theater offered a double feature, 2 movies for the price of one. You could spend an entire afternoon or evening at the cinema, and for $1 or less, you got entertainment, escape, and air conditioning on a hot summer day. The telephone in the 1950s was a different beast entirely. It was a rotary phone to dial a number. You stuck your finger in the hole for each digit and rotated the dial clockwise. You can still remember that sound, can't you? The clicking as the dial returned to position. Phone numbers started with names. Instead of just numbers, you might dial Butterfield 8 or Pennsylvania 6-5000. The first 2 letters corresponded to numbers, and then came the digits. And many families had party lines. You shared the phone line with other households. You'd pick up the phone to make a call and might hear your neighbor already talking. You'd politely hang up and wait. Sometimes people listened in on conversations. Eavesdropping was a problem, and privacy was limited. Long-distance calls were expensive and reserved for important occasions. Yes, you had to pay extra to talk to someone who wasn't in your town. When the phone rang for a long-distance call, everyone paid attention. It usually meant important news, good or bad. Most long-distance communication happened through letters. You wrote letters by hand, put them in Eisenhower. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 started construction on 41,000 miles of highways. This would transform American travel, making it easier to drive across the country, connecting cities and states in ways that hadn't been possible before. Shopping meant going downtown. Most cities and towns had a main street or shopping district with department stores, specialty shops, dress shops, men's stores, shoe stores, five and dimes. The big department stores were impressive, multiple floors of merchandise. You might take the elevator, operated by an elevator operator who pulled the lever to start and stop at each floor and announced, "Third floor, ladies' apparel, shoes, and accessories." These stores had everything: clothing, housewares, furniture, toys. Some had lunch counters or restaurants where you could stop for a meal. Shopping downtown was a social activity, not just a chore. Do you remember S&H green stamps? Many stores gave them out with purchases. You'd collect the stamps in little books, licking each one to stick it in place. When you'd filled enough books, you could redeem them for products from a catalog: toasters, mixers, even furniture. Layaway was common too. If you couldn't afford something all at once, the store would hold it for you while you made payments. When you paid it off, you could take it home. The 1950s was a golden age for American workers, especially those in manufacturing. Factories were humming, producing everything from cars to appliances to clothing. If you worked in a factory, you likely had strong union representation, good wages, and solid benefits. The automotive industry employed hundreds of thousands. Steel mills, rubber plants, textile factories, these provided good middle-class jobs that didn't require a college degree. Why? Oh, you could graduate from high school, get hired at a factory, work there for 40 years, and retire with a pension. Office work was growing too. Secretaries, almost always women, typed letters on manual typewriters, answered phones, and kept things running smoothly. Men worked as managers, salesmen, accountants. The typing pool was rows of women at desks, typing letters, reports, and documents. To make copies, you used carbon paper, thin sheets of paper coated with carbon that transferred ink to create duplicates. If you made a mistake, you had to start over or use correction fluid. Men wore suits to work, even in summer heat. Fedoras were standard, every man had a hat. Women wore dresses, heels, and stockings even on the hottest days. The work culture emphasized loyalty. You joined a company expecting to stay there your whole career. The company provided job security, regular raises, and eventually a pension. It was a different relationship between employer and employee than we see today. Let's talk about what things cost, because these numbers seem almost unbelievable now. A new house, a decent family home, might cost $8,000 to $12,000. A new car, a nice one, could be purchased for $1,500 to $2,500. A gallon of gas cost about 25 cents. A loaf of bread was around 14 cents. A gallon of milk was about 92 cents. A postage stamp was 3 cents. The average family income was around $4,000 to $5,000 a year. That doesn't sound like much, but remember, everything costs less. A single income could support a family, pay the mortgage, own a car, and take a vacation. People saved money. You had a savings account at the local bank. The movement was beginning, though it wouldn't reach its peak until the 1960s. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that segregated schools were unconstitutional. In 1957, 9 black students tried to attend Little Rock Central High School in Arkansas. The governor tried to stop them. President Eisenhower had to send federal troops to protect the students and enforce the law. These images shocked many Americans and brought attention to racial injustice. For many black Americans, the 1950s were not a time of prosperity and opportunity. Segregation was legal in the South. Whites only signs marked water fountains, restrooms, restaurants, hotels. Discrimination in housing, employment, and voting rights was widespread. In 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Her arrest sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, led by a young minister named Martin Luther King Jr. This was the beginning of organized resistance that would grow into the civil rights movement of the 1960s. The 1950s were complicated. For many Americans, particularly white, middle-class families, it was a time of prosperity, security, and optimism. But that experience wasn't universal, and the decade's social structures were beginning to be questioned. Let's lighten things up a bit and talk about fashion, because the 1950s had a distinctive look. For women, the silhouette was all about the waist. Full skirts, cinched at the waist with a belt. Petticoats underneath to make the skirt puff out. Fitted bodices. This was Christian Dior's new look, and it emphasized an hourglass figure. Everyday dresses for housewives, printed cotton, often with flowers or geometric patterns. An apron tied over the dress to keep it clean while cooking. For more formal occasions, dresses with matching gloves, a small hat, maybe a pearl necklace. Stockings with seams up the back, and you had to make sure those seams were straight. Saddle shoes for teenagers. Pumps with a modest heel for adult women. Cat-eye glasses with rhinestones. The poodle skirt became an icon of teenage fashion, a felt circle skirt with an appliqued poodle or other decoration. Worn with a tight sweater, a wide belt, bobby socks, and saddle shoes. Men's fashion was more formal than today. Men wore suits to work, complete with a tie, vest, and fedora. The suit was probably gray, navy, or brown. The tie might have been narrow. The skinny tie was popular. For casual wear, men might wear slacks with a button-up shirt or a polo shirt. Jeans were for manual work or for teenagers trying to rebel. Speaking of rebellion, some teenagers adopted the greaser look, inspired by James Dean and Marlon Brando. Jeans or black pants, a white t-shirt, a leather jacket, boots. Hair slicked back with pomade. This was the bad boy look, and it drove parents crazy. Hairstyles required work. Women went to the beauty parlor regularly to get their hair set. Pin curls, victory rolls, page book cuts. At home, you might sleep in curlers, those uncomfortable plastic or metal rollers to wake up with curls. Men used Brylcreem or pomade to slick their hair back. The pompadour, hair swept up and back, was popular. A little curl in front, like Elvis, made you cool. What's interesting is that teenagers started developing their own fashion identity separate from their parents. Before the 1950s, young people dressed like miniature adults. But in the 50s, teenage fashion became its own thing: poodle skirts, leather jackets, saddle shoes, bobby socks. This was part of the emergence of teenage culture as something distinct. Teenagers had their own music, their own fashion, their own slang. They were becoming a market, a demographic, a force that advertisers and manufacturers recognized and targeted. And so, we come to the end of our journey through the 1950s. It was a remarkable decade, wasn't it? A time of change, of growth, of optimism. A time when America was finding its footing after the war, building suburbs and families, embracing new technologies, creating a culture that would influence generations to come. When we look back at the 1950s, it's easy to feel nostalgic. There was a simplicity to life, or at least, life felt simpler in some ways. Children played outside safely. Neighborhoods were communities. Families ate dinner together every night. You knew your neighbors, and you looked out for one another. The economy was strong. A single income could support a family. Jobs were stable. The future felt bright. But it's also important to remember that this experience wasn't universal. The prosperity and security that many families enjoyed wasn't shared by everyone. Racial segregation was legal. Women's roles were limited. Conformity was expected, and those who didn't fit the mold often struggled. The 1950s were complicated like any decade, like any time period. There was good, and there was bad. There was progress, and there was injustice. There was joy, and there was anxiety. But what we can say is this. The people who lived through the 1950s, whether you were a child playing in the street, a teenager discovering rock and roll, a young parent building a life, or someone working hard to change unjust systems, you were part of history. You lived through a pivotal decade that shaped the world we live in today. The technology we take for granted now, computers, the internet, smartphones, began with the innovations of the 1950s. The civil rights progress we've made started with the courage of people who fought for justice in that decade. The teenage culture that emerged then changed how young people see themselves forever. So as we remember the 1950s, the sock hops and the drive-ins, the I Love Lucy episodes and the Elvis songs, the neighborhood friendships and the family dinners, let's remember them honestly. The good parts and the challenging parts. The joy and the struggle. Because your memories matter. Your experiences matter. Whether you remember standing in line at the soda fountain, practicing your penmanship at school, watching your first television set, or fighting for the rights and recognition you deserve, those memories are part of our collective history. Thank you so much for taking this journey with me today. I hope it brought back some wonderful memories, maybe made you smile, maybe even made you a bit wistful for days gone by. I'd love to hear your stories. What do you remember most about the 1950s? What was your favorite TV show? What was your first car? What did your neighborhood look like? Please share your memories in the comments below. Why? Our stories help paint a fuller picture of what life was really like, and I know other viewers would love to read them. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We'll be continuing this series with a look at life in the 1960s, and then the 1970s and beyond. There's so much more to explore together. Until next time, thank you for watching, and thank you for sharing your memories with us.